Hello again. Here we have a presentation on Monteverdi's opera L'incoronazione di Poppea. It was written in 1642 uh, and, premiered in Venice in one of the public theaters there. Uh, by this time, Monteverdi had had over 30 years of experience writing opera, and he was 70, and he actually brought in a group of other composers, at least one we know of, to help him finish this opera. But he planned it out and wrote most of the music. So, and he's certainly responsible for the work. So, the presentation here, you see these two deer or butting heads. I like it because it presents the conflict. It's an ideal way of presenting it. So, let's walk our way through the piece. There's a lot of great things about this opera. So we have here, well, the main conflict is presented, if you look above, in the allegorical frame of a fight between virtue and fortune on one hand. Actually, they're butting heads against each other at the beginning. But then love steps in and asserts that he or she, it's always played by a woman, even though Cupid is a male figure, is the most powerful god. So that's the allegorical frame here, and presented as earlier operas that we've studied as a prologue. So it's a wonderful performance that from Les Arts Florissants that you could see. They giving you the exact tracking for the first 12 minutes. You can see the prologue plus the first entrance of the main character. And you'll see Fortune is presented as a blind figure of singer and also bald. It's a kind of a modern production, though it's not really set in any specific time. Love, you won't miss. It's a soprano, and she's holding a little boy. Looks like Cupid. It's important because you'll see them again in the context of the opera. They're not limited to the prologue alone. So Love demonstrates, says, I'll demonstrate to you my superiority through this story. So he tells the story of the coronation of Poppea. So if you listen through to the very beginning of the opera, you'll see the entrance of the character Ottone. Ottone had hoped to marry Poppea. He was away from Rome, and when he returned to the beginning of the opera, in the middle of the night, he discovers that she is sleeping with the emperor. He's obviously devastated by this discovery. An interesting feature that you will get used to, especially in the next couple of weeks, is the fact that the character of Ottone is sung by a man singing in a women's register. He's singing in a mezzo-soprano range. It was originally, this role was originally performed by a castrato. We're going to do a whole part of the next module from the 18th century opera on the castrati, so you'll learn a lot more later, but you need to know a little bit now. The castrati can be performed either by women as a sort of trouser role, which was a later development in the context of opera in the 18th century. So modern productions, since we don't have castrati around, can use women in the role. They can use, they could transpose the music down an octave and have a man sing it in his natural register. Or more recently, we use men singing, countertenors singing in a reinforced falsetto or head voice. So you get the closest effect to what it would originally have been, even though they are not the same as castrati. So another figure. Now all of these figures are on the side, the left side here of my presentation. They are incensed by the affair that Nero is having with Poppea and oppose his attempts to basically depose of his wife and marry Poppea. Obviously, the person who's against this the most is Nero's present queen, Ottavia. When she discovers this affair, she sings an incredibly moving recitative in the stile representativo style. It's one of the highlights of the pinnacles of this style. Disprezzata Regina. You're going to write a paper on this later in the module, so you'll get to learn much more about this piece. You get to study it in a lot more detail. You may have already seen the excerpt from my first presentation about Seneca just before he commits suicide, and the sort of madrigal that follows his short aria. Seneca is the one voice of virtue in this story, and it's emblematic of the story that he's forced to kill himself. So that shows you the fate of virtue in this opera. Now the other side, the love side. Nero and Poppea. They're the lovers at the center of this work. Now, Nero, history does not remember him fondly. He's the one who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. He's known for being much more interested in pursuing arts and playing music than actually governing Rome. This opera, it was controversial at its time. It still is, frankly. It remains probably the most morally ambiguous opera ever created. And the music and the story does not ask you to judge them. There's a very good, the author of your textbook Paraclus does a very nice commentary on this. You're not asked to judge him. You're asked just to experience his and Poppea's feelings, and there's no question in the context of this opera that they feel passionately about each other. Another interesting character in the story is Arnalta, Poppea's maid, who actually gives her good advice about how to get what she wants, which is to become the empress. And of course she's using Nero to do this. Arnalta is a comic character, sort of in the tradition of Juliet's nurse from Shakespeare's play, and it's a travesty role. That is, it's a role sung by a man, a tenor, not a castrati, but a man in a tenor role playing a woman. So we're getting right in this work some of the gender bending that is pervasive in 17th and 18th century opera. If you look over to the right here, I have a little definition here of travesty. It just generally refers to cross-dressing, either way, men playing women or women playing men. I usually use the word travesty roles to describe men playing women in farcical or comical contexts, as distinguished from trouser roles, which properly refers to a woman playing a man. You see trouser roles are common in Shakespeare, and that is a woman playing a man in the context of the story. You may be aware that in Shakespeare, men and women were not allowed, in Shakespeare's time, men and women were not allowed to perform together on stage. So all of those early Shakespeare performances, boys played the roles of women. So 17th century audiences would probably not have been very much affected at all by seeing a lot of this cross-dressing. They would be fairly used to it. Alright, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about, back to this allegorical figure of love. Unlike those earlier operas we studied, where we saw tragedy and music sing in the prologues of the Orpheus stories, here love, virtue, and fortune actually attempt to intercede in the story. The climax of the work, occurs at a crucial moment where Ottone has been driven by Ottavia to murder Poppea. He actually dresses himself as a woman, as Drusilla, a chambermaid or an attendant to Poppea, in order to get into her chamber while she's asleep, and he's going to kill her. So please go back to the YouTube clip. It's the clip of the entire opera. And go to this spot at 2 hours and 18 minutes and 35 seconds, and you'll see this entire passage. A wonderful, and highly theatrical scene. I think you'll recognize that the opera, this is 30 years into the history of opera, 35 years really, and you'll see this is a much more conventionally dramatic story in presentation, with suspense and action, and you'll see a Deus ex machina, which is so common to the period, literally a god coming in on a machine. So I have a little definition of that here. So we'll go and just move to that spot in the opera to see that passage. Now, the conclusion of the opera, you can't, whatever you feel about Poppea and this morally dubious claim to the crown, or her actions in order to get the crown, you can't deny yourself the incredible ending here, the final duet, Pur ti miro, a great example of the lieto fine, or a happy ending, that is by now obligatory in Italian opera. So enjoy that.